Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast. Joining me as co-host Stephen Kerr, 65 plus years in sports journalism between the two of us. Glad to have you guys aboard. And later in the show, we're going to talk about the Framber Valdez injury, the Astros week, and some incredible news for Cougar basketball. But Stephen, since the Texans made the Stefon Diggs trade, I had on Cody Stutes, but you and I haven't had a chance to react. What was your reaction when you heard about it?
Yeah, and that was a great show, by the way. Cody is something else. He definitely knows his stuff, and he made some great points. And pretty much along the same line, I was happy with the trade, especially when the Texans voided the last 3 years of Stefon's contract, because as we know, Stefon has kind of worn out his welcome everywhere he's been. The thing is, if it's going to incentivize him to have a really good year, well, that's great for the Texans because they need a lead wide receiver to have a great year like that, along with Nico Collins, along with Tank Dell, provided that he can come back from his injury. So all in all, I liked the trade. I didn't, see anything wrong with it, especially the Texans didn't give up that much for him. They did void the last 3 years of his contract. I would have been a little more concerned if that contract had remained in place, especially considering what we just talked about, some personal things about Diggs that may or may not upset the Texans locker room. But I still think, Robert, and I know Cody alluded to this too, and I agree, I do think they need to still draft a wide receiver, maybe not in the first couple of picks, but somebody in the middle rounds that they can bring along. They don't have to throw in the lineup right away because A, you don't know if Stefon Diggs is going to be around for more than a year. B, you don't know who's going to get injured or if Tank is going to be able to come back well from his injury. C, Robert Woods, you don't know how long he's going to be sticking. He may be gone by the time training camp's over. So there are a number of reasons that the Texans should still address the wide receiver position in the draft. It's just, it's not going to be as much of a top priority as it might have been before the Stefon Diggs trade.
You mentioned all those factors, but how about another one? Nico is not on paper beyond this year either yet.
Well, that's right. And, that's going to be something to look at because, there's no guarantee he's going to have another great year next year. So if he falls off a bit, then the question becomes, well, do you take a chance and sign him long-term or do you not? So yeah, that is another factor in the mix that you should still get somebody that can make an impact for you, but you don't have to throw him in, this year.
All right. With all that going on, and you mentioned the voided contract, but low key, Nick Caserio actually did a little trick with Diggs' contract. It's a big deal. As I'm sure everyone heard, Stephen alluded to, he's only signed for this year, but on the books, Caserio spread it out to only $4 million this year and $4 million each of the 3 years after this one. So Stephen, what he did is make more space for this year, meaning there's $23.5 million in cap space still available. Plenty of room to add more pieces. And this is a little Daryl Morey cap gymnastics, Stephen. Very impressive.
I tell you what, I admire these guys who know how to work the salary cap. I don't know about you, Robert, but math, statistics, not my strong suit. Not at all. I mean, even sports statistics can trip me up, especially the real advanced ones I have to think about. So that is pretty remarkable. And yeah, it puts the Texans in a position to add more pieces, but also puts them in a better position with the draft in case, who knows what other trades Caserio's got up his sleeve. We know that he's always bound to do something in the draft. So it definitely helps the Texans in a number of ways moving forward, the way he was able to do that. And yeah, again, he's got a gift of persuasion that very few people have apparently to be able to pull off this kind of thing.
As we sit here Tuesday afternoon, cornerback Stephon Gilmore and safety Justin Simmons are still available in the secondary. So those are options, but Caserio could be waiting for maybe using that money with some significant roster cuts that usually happen post NFL draft, Stephen. And what if a bigger name or two is released in May or June, or Caserio might also use that money on big name late training camp cuts too?
Well, that's why, I know people get upset sometimes after the first day or two of the quote unquote big free agents are off the board and you don't have a chance. Look, you also have to understand you've got the draft and you have those cuts that you're talking about, not just at the end of training camp, but, in the next month or so, there's going to be some that you could conceivably pick up, especially, in some of the Texans that needs that they still need to fill, like defensive tackle, for instance. Maybe another offensive lineman will become available at the right spot. Another wide receiver. I mean, you don't know. So that's why this move by Caserio is significant as well, because it could open up something not just in the draft, but one of these other cuts that other teams may be making between now and the end of training camp.
Even if they don't want to cut somebody in May or June, maybe they think, well, I don't know if we want to keep this guy around, but I don't want to get nothing for him. Don't forget, Caserio also picked up a 5th and a 6th round draft choice for Diggs that he could use, and you think that's nothing, but that's sometimes just all they want for some veteran that they would have released and got nothing for. So that's another option that they've got.
Well, that's right. And you never know who some of these mid-round picks will turn into. I mean, really, you could go on and on and on, not just with the Texans, but in the NFL. You never know when one of these is going to pan out. And the deal that got made to bring that there makes Caserio and other GMs like him look like a genius.
And also, Stephen, did you see CJ Stroud is already working out in California with Stefon Diggs and John Mechie? He's trying to build that chemistry so Diggs might re-sign on a discount, like one of those Walmart discount deals next year.
Well, and that's not surprising because if I remember correctly, after the Texans drafted CJ and he was signed, that he got a group of the receivers to work out before the season started. So that doesn't surprise me at all. And I think that's one of the reasons, hopefully Stefon Diggs will be happier because CJ Stroud definitely makes sure he takes care of his wide receivers, his offensive linemen, his running backs. He's the kind of guy that you want to hang around. So that's good to see. It doesn't surprise me in the least because he's done that in the past.
I mean, I can't imagine, and I don't know if you can, Stefon Diggs getting some major deal now that he's in his 30s. He's a diva. Nobody's going to sign him long. So it's going to be a short-term deal next. And it just, all it's going to matter is, I think is like, unless somebody blows him away, it's where Diggs wants to play.
Well, you never know, though, if he has a banner year. I mean, if his numbers have dropped off somewhat, but gosh, he still caught, 1,100 yards for 8 touchdown passes last season, a little bit under what his previous numbers have been. But hey, if you're the Texans, you'll definitely take that. But what if he surpasses that? What if he has a really good year? Somebody could come along. But, it's still good for the Texans. If he is happy there and they're happy with him, maybe they'll throw some bigger money at him. Maybe not the kind that you throw a 26 or 27-year-old, but certainly reasonably enough to keep him after next year.
Man, Stephen, it just feels like I've walked into one of those Star Trek parallel universes with just Texans good news after Texans good news after Texans good news, these past few months.
Well, don't you think the law of average, it's about time, isn't it? I mean, the law of averages had to catch up sometime because we went through the last several years. It seemed like 10 years, but I guess it was only 3, 4 of nothing but bad Texans news after bad Texans news. So, hey, it's time for it to come around. And you just hope that all of this does lead to the Texans continuing where they left off from last year, that you don't have another downer year. And I've got a feeling in my gut, Robert, that it's not going to happen. I just think this team is on an upward trajectory. Look, if the Astros can run off 7 straight ALCS appearances, hey, the Texans can start moving upward and get deeper into the playoffs and maybe even finally make an AFC championship game for the first time in their history.
Man, if anybody's wondering, why I wear these hats all the time is because those 3 or 4 years that Stephen said, only 3 or 4 years, I think I lost all my hair during those 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. And, with you doing the show, Robert, you wear a number of different hats anyway. So that's pretty appropriate.
Yeah, exactly. Let's move to the Astros. And Monday night, the bullpen finally came to the rescue. Blair Henley, not the best debut, and he was thrown into the fire after Framber was pulled with elbow soreness. Before we get to Framber, Stephen, how do you feel about Henley and his career 4.47 minor league ERA being tossed into the fire against the Rangers, a division rival, a big game you would think early in the year? Was that the only option? Dana Brown and Espada are under the white hot spotlight right now. I don't know.
I think he was the only option, Robert, in only that he was the only one that was available to pitch that day. I think, that it was going to be his turn to pitch anyway. Sean Dubin, he's just coming back from surgery. He's only pitched an inning.
Could you have done a bullpen day, maybe? I don't know.
I was thinking you could start Brandon Bielak and maybe piggyback him with Seth Martinez, but you'd probably, I guess, as it turned out, you could have, because Henley didn't even make it out of the first inning. So, in hindsight, it probably wouldn't have mattered if you had done, an opener type situation, put Bielak in there and maybe follow him with Martinez or something. Now it looks pretty poor that they did that. But I think, at the time they were thinking, gosh, we used the bullpen enough already. Let's see if we can get some innings out of this guy and maybe he'll show us something. But yeah, it was a long shot, Robert, because look, and he is a former Longhorn, by the way. So I'm not ragging on him, but he pitched all of last year in Corpus Christi. And I think he only had one start this early in the season this year with Sugar Land. So he really just didn't hardly have any AAA experience, much less major league experience to come out. Sometimes you strike gold with that sort of thing and sometimes you don't, but it was almost as if Henley was set up to fail just because of the situation he was put in.
Yeah. Not sure Bielak would have been the best option either. He's got like an 8.1 ERA, 375 batting average again so far this year. And Stephen, I can't remember. Did he pitch on Sunday?
I think he pitched on Monday. I think he did come in, after Martinez did. So, it could have been, I don't know that I'd start Bielak. I'm not comfortable with him as a starter. Him coming out of the bullpen, he still hasn't done that well, but it's a crapshoot. You either go with him or you go with Henley because you just don't have anybody in your AAA club that could do it. I think Spencer Arrighetti, it would have been too soon for him to come up because he might have been the likely choice.
Yeah, 3 days rest, and he hasn't even had really all that much success so far. I think he's given up 7 runs in 8 innings.
Right. So you're just, I mean, this is why, Robert, these injuries are so disturbing because you've got the bare bones of this and, the farm system. And we've talked about this ad nauseum, but the farm system with the Astros, I mean, it's killing them right now just because of specifically all the pitching injuries. You don't have the kind of depth that you can go into. There's only so far you can go. And you even have some guys in your minor league system that are injured. So yeah, it just was, they were caught between a rock and a hard place, I think.
Yeah. It's tough when you go into a season and you've got 8 starters or 9 starters and they're all injured. I mean, you had a bunch of major league starters definitely on this team signed to contracts and they're, with everybody injured, it's just, with Garcia out and Verlander out and Lance McCullers out and blah, 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 on and on and on and on. So yeah, that's tough. And I mean, you still, with all that going on, Blanco still giving you, one of the great starts in MLB history. I think they said he got out the most guys to start a season, Stephen, in the modern era since I don't know, like 1893.
I think in 1901, I think there was a pitcher who did, but yeah, in the late 1800s. Yeah, I think it was 50 batters, I believe. The first 50 batters he retired this season on outs before they finally got a hit in the 6th inning. And
yeah, he gave up a walk, right?
He did. Well, he gave up 2 walks in the no-hitter, both to Springer. And then he gave up one in the game that he pitched on Sunday night. So yeah, but as far as outs are concerned, he got the first 50 outs, I think, before somebody got a hit. So, the biggest concern I had, usually when a pitcher comes off a no-hitter, they don't do quite as well the next time out. Now, the fact that he even flirted with a second no-hitter is amazing in and of itself, because as we know, the only player who's done that has only happened once, and it was in the 1930s with Johnny Vandermeer. So the likelihood of that happening just was almost slim to none, but he came so close, and thank goodness, the bullpen, it almost caved in, but they preserved it, because that would have been a shame if the Astros had blown that game and that performance by Blanco for a second time.
Yeah, I remember when Mike Scott threw the no-hitter to clinch the division against the Giants, his next start. I remember he went into like the 7th, I think, before he gave up a hit in that.
Yeah, he came close. Yeah, so that's right. Mike Scott almost did the same thing. So, I mean, the Astros and no-hitters, they seem to be synonymous with each other the last few years, Robert, because, we've had some in some playoff games. But what fascinates me about it, it's not always the great pitchers who can do it. I mean, Ronel Blanco, he hardly had any major league seasoning for starts either. He only had a handful coming into this season. And you weren't even sure how he was going to do being put in that number 5 spot. So here he goes in his first start. He comes out and his second start, pitches a no-hitter. I mean, gosh, who would have expected that? But this seems to happen time and time again in baseball. And, before this whole Framber situation came up, I was going to ask you, well, who are you going to take out of the rotation when Justin Verlander comes back? And if Blanco continues to pitch the way he does by that point, well, it's probably a moot point now, but it certainly would have been fascinating to talk about.
Yeah, you just hit on a sore spot for me, because one of my big pet peeves I have for Astros conversation is don't discuss who's getting dropped from the starting pitching rotation until we're sure more than 5 guys are healthy. If there's one lesson we should have learned, starting pitching injuries are just nonstop. Plus, there's now the 6-man rotation, which, I'd implement every chance I could as long as you have 6 solid starters.
Well, yeah, and especially with, the month of April is brutal, not just for the quality of schedule that the Astros have had, but 20 games in 21 days. I mean, you've got to have that rotation. And even after that, you could still have a 6-man rotation, just rest some guys. So it's good to have it when you can have it. But, man, the way these injuries are piling up, it's going to be tough just to do that throughout the year.
All right, let's go back to Framber, because Framber had a rough second half of last season, as we all remember, and now there's the elbow soreness. He's 30 years old. Stephen, this is why it's so dangerous for a pitcher's agent to play hardball when he's offered that early contract extension. Remember that when Dana Brown was working on an extension, Framber was at his peak. I'm sure Javier is really glad right now that he signed that extension.
Yeah, it. I mean, pitching it is just such a fickle thing, Robert. You can sign these guys to, multi-year, hundreds of $1 million. I mean, we could even say that about Josh Hader. I mean, he's been relatively healthy for the most part over the years, but who's to say? He could go down tomorrow. I mean, you don't know anymore. So the fact that Framber has got some questionable things going with the elbow soreness, it makes you pause and go, well, do we want to do that with this guy? Especially with, the year that he had last year, it certainly wasn't like what he had the year before. And he's been okay. I mean, his first start wasn't terrible, but he walked to way too many guys. His second start was much better. The only reason they lost is the Astros bullpen blew the lead. So there's just a lot of uncertainty with Framber right now. And I think it's too early to even think about wanting to try to sign him long-term right now.
You ready to talk some Astros offense?
Yeah, why not? The one thing we can say is they did bail out the poor performance by Henley on Monday night. But boy, to start the season, Robert, there are definitely some question marks.
Well, not really. See, my thing is the only truly disappointing thing about the offense so far is their struggles with runners in scoring position. As we talked Tuesday afternoon, 6 of the starters and Caratini have a better than 800 OPS. But Stephen, let's go to the bad stuff. Who's your most disappointing Astros hitter so far? It shouldn't be like that hard.
No, it's not that hard. Well, now we could put Jose Abreu in the conversation, but I think that's obvious because we've talked about him over and over again. So
yeah, he's my number one.
I'm not going to use him. I'm going to talk about Alex Bregman for a moment, Robert. Look, it's not just this season that I'm talking about. Alex Bregman hasn't put a really good season together from start to finish since that MVP year. What was it, 2019, I believe? That's what, 5 years ago. Now, I know he's had some injuries in the past and that sort of thing, but that does play into it. And so if we're sitting here talking about, oh, we should re-sign Bregman to another huge contract and extend it, look, I understand that third basemen like him from the defensive side are at a premium. It's very hard to find a really good third baseman. But when it comes to hitting, look, Alex Bregman is not giving me what I think a third baseman should be giving. Hitting in the 260s the last couple of years, that's not going to cut it for a third baseman. And how about some more power? I need more power from the third base side. I need more power from Bregman. And we've heard so much talk this offseason how it's the healthiest offseason he's ever had. He hadn't had all the injuries to go through, that he's had a full offseason of training, and he's been doing, weighted bats and doing all kinds of things to get his body in shape. Well, that's all well and good, but he has not shown me in several years that he's worth that kind of contract if we're going to talk about discussing it.
Yeah, the one thing that he does do, though, is he typically shows up in October, and he brings that leadership that you want in a clubhouse, especially down the stretch of a season. I just feel like there's an it factor. There's something about him that's really hard to quantify over the years. And, there's only a couple of guys that you go through these last 7 seasons and they're a common denominator, and Bregman and Altuve are really those guys, right?
They are, and I don't disagree with you, but when it comes to the kind of contract that Scott Boras is going to be asking for, I just don't know that I'm ready to put him on the same plane as an Altuve. And, Altuve's had his struggles in years past, but look, he's gotten off to a great start this year too. So it's just a very delicate balance you're walking with Alex Bregman. And I need to see, and this is a big year for him. If he wants that contract, he's got to put out, or there'll be a lot of other teams that are going to be hesitant and kind of shying away from offering him, several $100 million over 10 years or what have you. But no, I agree. The Astros offense as a whole, has certainly, they're still among some of the top categories, like in home runs and other things, but it is the runners on base. And, this has been a problem over the years, Robert. They had the same problem last year. And that's the sort of thing that's going to bite you when you get later into the season and get into the playoffs. But there have been some guys that certainly have come through. Jordan, he got off to a slow start, but now he's found his groove. Altuve's doing great. Tucker, he's kind of been hit and miss. Jeremy Pena's been hitting much, much better. Yainer Diaz, he started off hot. He's kind of cooled off a little bit, but I still think we're going to see some good things out of him. So the offense isn't a total bust. It's just there are some holes, though, that definitely need to be filled, especially if you're going to have some shaky pitching with the bullpen and your starters being ineffective or injured.
Yeah, well, it's not really an offensive issue, except I just keep coming back to it. It's you got to get the hits with guys on base, and the Astros do this thing where they'll score 10 runs one night, and then they can't get any. It's like they're like 1 for 10 with runners in scoring position the next night, and that seems to have been a problem the last 2 or 3 years. Where we remember the teams like in 17, maybe even in 19, they were clutch hitters, especially that 17 team. That was the clutch of the clutchest, and trash cans, whatever. I mean, they were doing it on the road. So I just feel like that team was maybe the most clutch Astros team of all time, the 17 team. And I do want to speak though to the Jose Abreu situation. If it's another April and May disaster, Dana Brown needs to find a real first baseman well before the trade deadline, not in late July. And you just got to release Jose Abreu. It's not just that he's a poor hitter at a hitting position, but he's not exactly a wizard with his glove either. There's only one error, but Stephen, there have been some tough scoops and other plays that just good fielding first basemen make.
Yeah, that and the fact that, he just seems to be constantly late on fastballs. The other night he swung at a pitch. It was a fastball. It was only 91 miles an hour. Now, for you and me, that's near impossible to hit. But a guy like Abreu, it's just obvious that His swing is just not what it used to be. It's not been there. And then the defensive things that you just talked about. The problem is, Robert, before the trade deadline, I mean, you could possibly, the only way you could do it is to make a deal. I mean, who are you going to pick up on the bargain bin that's probably going to do any better? But it kind of makes you wonder. The Astros have put themselves in a position where they would go over that luxury tax threshold at the end of the season. So it kind of makes you wonder, can they find a way to dump this contract to at least lower that ceiling a bit, but more importantly, to get more production out of your first baseman? Because, the biggest problem they had is they just don't have any depth at that position, even in the minor leagues or on the club. I mean, you got some guys you can put in there every once in a while for a day off, but you're not going to put Victor Caratini at first base permanently. You're not going to put Yainer Diaz there permanently. You're not even going to put somebody like Gray Kessinger there permanently. So that's the biggest problem you have. And it almost makes me wonder, would they have been better served in the offseason, maybe going for some first base help, at least to get you some better backup help than a John Singleton, a Gray Kessinger or whomever? Maybe, signing Josh Hader is great, but did you really need to do that?
Yeah, my question so far with Dana Brown is, what's he doing at the margins? And I'm not seeing what I like so far. The GMs that win at the margins, Stephen, those are the guys that usually win the championship.
Well, that's right. I was just going to say, those margins are very important. I mean, you've talked about it before. Look at the moves that James Click made, albeit in his brief time here, but the moves that he made in the bullpen were pretty much spot on. And Dana Brown has yet to prove, and it's still early in the season. So I'm certainly not giving up on Josh Hader and Ryan Presley and Brian Abreu, but there does have to be some discussion about that, though.
Yeah, you can't just depend on those three guys to carry your bullpen. That's the thing about baseball. These bullpens, you got to use them all the time. He knew going into the season that there was a lot of injury issues and a lot of stuff that you were worried about with the staff. And, just look at James Click. The Mauricio Dubon trade. Everybody forgets. James Click does that trade, and boy, did that one pay dividends. It's still paying dividends. Look, the guy that's doing maybe the best right now, the game-saving pitching on Monday night, Seth Martinez in the bullpen. Seth Martinez was a Rule 5 pickup by Jeff Luhnow. It was one of the last moves that he made, Stephen, before he had to resign. But that was like December of 2020, and then that was it. A couple of months later, he had to step down. But that, to me, that's the kind of stuff that I need to start seeing from Dana. I'm glad he identified Ronel Blanco could be a starter. That's good, but that's more of like, okay, it's something that he spotted, and maybe I don't know who was helping him spot that. It might not have just been Dana Brown, but that's the type of stuff that, he's got to get better at. I need to see him start doing, or I'm going to go, okay, Dana Brown needs to go.
Yeah. And I'm sure you won't be alone. And, of course you have, I still got to give him a little bit of time because it is only his second year, but, and some of these moves do take time to pay off. Seth Martinez, he wasn't an instant success. It's taken him a while to develop. And, some of the other moves that Click made and Luhnow and so forth, they don't all come in right away, but at some point you need to start seeing something out of them. And, with Abreu, you've had more than enough of a sample size to go, this guy has obviously not been a good pickup. You had a full season last year. Okay, he showed some flashes late, and he did pretty good in the postseason. But Robert, the thing is, you can't have everybody on your team, minus the obvious ones who are just great all year long. You can't have too many people who just show up, do the Robert Horry thing where you just show up in the postseason. You got to get there. And you need more and more guys to get there through the season. And guys like Jose Abreu, they're not going to get you there. Once you're there, maybe they can help you, but you still got to get there.
All right, let's close with some great news, really great news that we've heard in the last 24 hours for our Coogs fans out there. Juwan Roberts and LJ Cryer both using their extra year of eligibility and coming back next year. Stephen, the NIL and COVID helping the Coogs in this perfect storm, getting those two guys back.
Yeah, no doubt. And, Roberts, he just had surgery on his knee, that's been bothering him for the last several weeks. He should be good to go in 4 to 6 weeks. So, to have him back by the time the season starts at full strength, that is great to see. And LJ Cryer, I had a feeling that he was going to come back. I need to see more from LJ Cryer. I need to see more consistency. And I think him having an opportunity to come back next season will give him that. So, yeah, great news for the Cougs. For those two players coming back, that's definitely going to help in the experience factor because you're going to have a lot of new guys coming in. And, yeah, they may be highly touted. And Kelvin Sampson does have a knack of putting guys, the first-year guys, whether they be freshmen or transfers, in the spots where they can thrive. But, the point guard position, of course, is going to be the biggest question. How are you going to replace Jamal Shedd? And that's going to be something we're going to have to keep an eye on. But, man, those two guys coming back is definitely going to help.
Yeah, and you might think, well, Shedd's got an extra year. Maybe he's going to come back now. But Cryer intimated in his, an interview just within the last few hours that he'll be taking a lot of Shed's responsibilities at this point. It sounds like he knows Shed's not coming back. And I think Sampson sort of intimated the same thing.
Sampson knows. I think they do know. And yeah, as great as it would be to have Jamal Shed back, I just have a feeling it's not going to happen. So the fact that LJ Cryer is coming back, if he can take on some more of those responsibilities, if he can shoot more consistently the way we've heard he can, that's going to be just all the better for the Cougs going forward.
Yeah, Juwan Roberts, by the way, I think he's up to like 136 games as a Cougar already.
That's amazing.
I assume that's going to be the record when, if he plays all next year, when it's all said and done. I mean, I know Fabian played, a lot with the Cougars an extra year, but I think he missed some injury time.
He did. He was out with an injury for most of the year, a couple of years ago, I think it was. So yeah, Roberts would he'd have to be the guy if he plays all of next season.
I don't know if you're paying much attention to the NCAA tournament, Stephen, but I think the Cougars were the only team that could have legitimately given UConn. If they had Tugler and Shed, they could have given UConn a run for its money, because I just knew like 3 or 4 games into the tournament, I'm like, and nobody's to touch it. U of H is the only team that could have really given them the business.
Yeah, I would agree. And I kept hoping for a UH-UConn matchup, because I just felt that the bracket that they were in, I think, set them up to succeed. And, we can talk about Purdue, and they certainly bounced back from when they got bounced out. They were the ones that got bounced out in the first round last year, and they come back and make it to the final. But UConn was just going to be too strong, and we knew that. But when the depth just kind of fell apart with all those injuries, you knew it probably wasn't going to happen, even if they got to that point.
Yeah, they needed Tugler bad.
Oh, Tugler would have, yeah.
And because
let's not forget him coming back next year too. That's definitely going to be a bonus if he can bounce back from that injury.
Yeah, because UConn's got those bigs, and I mean, not just Klingon. There's the other guy they got, and yeah, it was. And let me just say, I mean, I had way more fun watching Iowa and Caitlin Clark in the tournament than
no doubt
anything beyond the Cougars in the NCAA tournament. I mean, it was a joy to watch. I was a little disappointed. She sort of laid an egg in that last game. I think she was like 10 for 28. She had several turnovers. Wasn't one of her best games for sure. And all credit to South Carolina. Obviously, that's a juggernaut, undefeated, but boy, they were fun to watch. And it wasn't just Caitlin. I mean, I became a fan of Kate Martin and Gabby Marshall. I mean, they had a great one of the better senior classes, and great story. And you felt like, they're the underdog. Even as good as Caitlin Clark is, they look smaller. They don't like quite as athletic as a lot of these teams that you're used to seeing in the Final Four on the women's side.
It is so. You can remember a time not so long ago, Robert, that women's sports, they were always getting the short end of the stick, especially in coverage and acceptance and TV ratings. And man, how time flies and how far they have come. I mean, just think about it. Players like Caitlin Clark, especially over the last couple of years, have done a lot for that. And even though she's leaving, some of those names you just mentioned, but let's not forget, let's throw in Juju Watkins from USC. I mean, she's going to be another big name to keep an eye on next year, and several others that are going to be coming in that are going to continue to propel women's sports forward. And you're right. I think, a lot of people enjoyed watching the women's Final Four and the championship than they did the men. And who would have said that a number of years ago?
Yeah, we just got finished talking about college basketball men's. We got finished talking about the University of Houston. We haven't talked about the Rockets. Tomorrow, we're going to have a special tribute to Hakeem Olajuwon. So you're going to want to watch and listen to that one for all of you fans out there of the show and fans of the Rockets. So check that one out. But that's all we got for this one. We'll talk some more Astros and hopefully maybe more good stuff from the Texans. You never know next week. But great to catch up with you, Stephen. Let's do it again.
That sounds good to me.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, don't forget to support us by subscribing and commenting on YouTube. You can always listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends about us and share our show links on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.